If I asked a random group of people what they think of the Lord of the Rings, the Dark Knight or Studio Ghibli movies, I feel like everyone can semi-agree with each other on how good or bad those films are. However, the same thing cannot be said with the Star Wars prequels. Everyone disagrees with each other. I asked my best friend the other day what he thinks of the prequels, and he adores them to death, whereas some of my other friends really think they're overrated. Now, what do I think of these movies? They're, well, it's complicated. See, I was never really a big Star Wars fan, and I think I watched those movies when I was like 10 years old, but I barely remember shit about these movies. But the trilogy has a 20-year anniversary coming up, so I found the perfect excuse to watch these movies and review them. And so watching this trilogy kind of felt like it was for the first time since it's been so long. Although the one thing I definitely remember is that I didn't really like these movies as a kid. So, does that opinion still apply after watching these movies? Well, we're gonna find out by talking about these movies in release order. So to answer that question, it's time to talk about, in my opinion, the worst Star Wars movie in the whole trilogy. Is this the worst movie in the entire franchise? No. That award goes to The Rise of Skywalker. That movie actively makes the rest of the franchise worse, which is why the majority of people don't even want to rewatch that film, including myself. However, outside of that movie, if I was ever to rewatch every Star Wars movie, The Phantom Menace is the film I'd be least looking forward to. Not because it ruins the rest of the franchise, but because in my opinion it adds the least to the overall Star Wars saga. This movie seriously feels like a standalone movie like Star Wars Solo and Rogue One because of how disconnected the story and plot feels to the rest of the franchise. But those movies are meant to have their separate storylines. They're not directly connected to the mainline story, whereas The Phantom Menace has a huge task in launching the franchise in chronological order. And yet, if you completely skip this movie and start watching from episode 2, the plot really doesn't change that much. Now, when I say this film is disconnected from the other movies, that doesn't mean it's completely worthless. After all, we learn about Anakin's backstory, how he falls in love with Padme, which is done really badly, and the origins of the politics in this trilogy. However, the first film of a trilogy should also establish a character's wants and needs, their motivations, and their character arcs. It allows the sequel movies to build upon and further develop these characters. Audiences will want to stay engaged and watch them grow, which makes them more memorable and realistic. For example, Tony Stark in the first Iron Man movie is really selfish, however he learns to be more selfless not only throughout the end of that film, but throughout every Marvel film he appears in. This makes his character arc a lot more compelling because he learns from his mistakes and is willing to improve as a person from the very beginning. That doesn't apply in this movie. There's not one character that experiences something in this movie and learns from it for the next film. I have no reason to revisit this film because the characters feel so alienated, especially when comparing them to how they act in the sequel films. So, we're following characters whose goals are extremely one-dimensional, we never get their motives as to why they're doing what they're doing, and worst of all, they're really fucking boring. One of the biggest issues everyone has with this entire trilogy is the fucking dialogue.
Be wary. I sense a disturbance in the Force.
I feel it also, Master.
Don't let them send any transmissions.
Who talks like this? Not only is it tough for the actors to showcase their personalities because they're way too focused on delivering the shitty ass dialogue, but it also provides zero chemistry between the actors. No one's personality stands out. I shall now talk in a Shakespearean language where I remove my personality and ensure my formal language with my audience. Could you imagine if I talked like that for the entire video? You'd all fall asleep. And yet this movie does that for its entire runtime. This isn't the actor's fault because even Qui-Gon Jinn, played by an actor who gives one of the best performances I've ever seen in Schindler's List, is pretty bad in this film. 90% of conversations between the characters is directly telling each other what they're going to do, as we watch these guys do exactly what they say they're going to do. There's no banter between them, the characters never learn about one another, it's just exposition. We don't even see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn have a meaningful conversation with each other, and yet we're expected to give a shit when Qui-Gon dies. This is George Lucas's fault. The man who wrote and directed these films, and oh god is the direction truly terrible. There's a scene of a giant sea creature chasing after our characters in what's supposed to be an intense chase scene. And so how do the characters react?
Relax.
Why are they so damn calm? In another scene, Qui-Gon finds out that this child has the highest score in the history of Jedis, even higher than Yoda, and this is how he reacts.
The reading is off the chart. Over 20,000.
Even Master Yoda doesn't have a midichlorian count that high.
No Jedi has.
Can we please get some sort of reaction? This isn't the actor's fault. This is George's fault. You have to direct them and give them some sort of reaction. Listen, I respect this man a lot. I think Star Wars has the best world building I've ever seen put to screen, and George is the biggest reason for that. I'd even go as far as to say he's incredible at writing, but that's what he's good at, writing stories and building a fictional world. He's horrible at writing dialogue, which was true in the original trilogy as well.
A lot of times it's a true story. Harrison Ford, who plays the space pirate in the film, at one point threatened to tie George up and make him say his own lines at gunpoint. I mean, the dialogue was a little bit difficult.
He's even a bad editor. His wife saved the movie by editing the first film herself and even won an award for it. And most of all, he cannot direct, especially when it comes to telling the actors what to do. And that's not the problem for this film particularly. The entire franchise has this issue. In fact, the dialogue gets even worse in the next movie. The reason why I'm talking about the characters so much is because for me, they're the most important thing to get right in a film, right behind the story. And that's especially true when it comes to an action-adventure story. Lord of the Rings and the Uncharted series have great stories and exciting action, but I would not enjoy those stories if the characters weren't so lovable, and unfortunately that's the biggest issue with this film. Something they thankfully improve upon with the next two films. However, there are two characters that have personality in this film, a shining light in this otherwise dull and boring movie. Anakin and especially Jar Jar Binks. Their dialogue doesn't simply consist of exposition and asking questions about the plot. Actually, I take that back, Anakin has a lot of questions, but he's at least fun to watch. He's a little reckless, which makes the pod racing scene more exciting. He even goes off on his own little adventure to destroy a starship, and not to mention he has crazy riz for his age.
Are you an angel?
What?
An angel. I heard the deep space pilots talk about them. They're the most beautiful creatures in the universe.
But unironically, by far my favorite character in this movie is Jar Jar Binks. Listen, I get it. If this were any other movie, I would find Jar Jar to be extremely annoying. I absolutely despise comedy relief characters. Sure, I don't mind when a character cracks a joke here and there, but if your sole purpose is to make jokes, I'm sorry, but I'm going to hate you. But Jar Jar is an exception because this movie is lifeless. There's a reason it took me 2 days to watch this film because I fell asleep halfway through. And it would have taken me longer if Jar Jar didn't exist. Everyone's performances are extremely stale as well. No one has any unique character traits, no one is funny, except for Jar Jar.
Don't do that again.
So excuse me for enjoying the only character in the entire film to showcase any sort of energy and life in the entire film. But it's now time to talk about the most important aspect of a film, the story. And honestly, things could be a lot worse. Now, what is the plot of this movie? Well, in summary, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan rescue Padme on the planet of Naboo in order to resolve an interplanetary trade dispute. So in other words, this movie exists because of the politics, which is another issue with this trilogy in general. There's too many scenes about politics.
Will you defer your motion to allow a commission to explore the validity of your accusations?
What?
Listen, I'm not saying you shouldn't have politics in your films. I'm saying that you have to do it well, and in my opinion, it shouldn't take up too much screen time. World building is crucial to immersing the audience into this world, and politics is a genuinely interesting way to do that. Attack on Titan and the Dune movies are stories that do it really well. I love crucial scenes between characters with differing political motivations, especially when the outcome of the discussion dramatically changes how the story plays out. And importantly, they don't take up a lot of time. And not to mention, they're not incredibly boring. I'll give credit to the costuming in these movies. They look excellent and add a lot of personality to an otherwise dull and boring world. But when the camera stays still for an entire scene with bad dialogue, flat performances, and a bad set design, I think you can begin to see why I struggled to stay awake for this movie. This is a Star Wars film. It's famous for having thrilling and engaging sequences with characters that leave you feeling rewarded, and yet there's only 2 sequences in the entire film that even had a resemblance of an engaging sequence. It's so jarring to think that a movie as exciting as The Empire Strikes Back is made by the same guy who created this movie. George even created the characters of Han Solo, Princess Leia, and Luke Skywalker, who are all great characters with great chemistry with one another. None of the characters in this film are anywhere near as likable as they are. Obi-Wan is a great character in the later movies, but tell me one thing we learn about him in the first film apart from being loyal to Qui-Gon. Nothing! He was arguably the worst character in the film, and people always told me that Obi-Wan carries the prequels. Not in this movie, I can tell you that for sure. Fucking Tenet has more fleshed out characters than this film. And that's saying a lot when the protagonist's name in that film is quite literally the protagonist. Actually, you know what? I changed my mind. I would watch this film again. If I ever have trouble falling asleep, I'll just put this movie on and immediately fall asleep. So yeah, in terms of character and story, things could be a lot better. So maybe the effects are good. Well, that's only partly right. The second and third film honestly looks really good for films that are over 20 years old. However, the effects in this film are extremely inconsistent. Sometimes I'll be thinking like, wow, this movie looks really good for a 26-year-old movie. But then other times the battlefield would look unrendered and it's just flat grass. I could go into Unity right now and make a similar looking texture, and keep in mind I have like no experience in that platform. Oh, and whilst we're on the topic of the battlefield, we get to see Jar Jar single-handedly destroy an entire army. I'm finally able to say good things about this movie because this is my favorite scene of the movie. Not only because it's genuinely funny, but because it reminds you of the Darth Jar Jar theory, which is up there as one of my favorite theories ever. In my mind, I watched these movies pretending like Jar Jar was secretly a Sith Lord, and it honestly made the movie so much better. It's probably why I like Jar Jar so much. Another positive thing I'll say is that the final act of this film is better than the rest of the movie. I won't have much to look forward to if I decide to rewatch this film, but I gotta admit I'd be looking forward to this lightsaber fight. This shit is really cool. But there is something that bothers me a lot, and don't yell at me in the comments for saying this, but Darth Maul is easily the most disappointing character in this trilogy. As a kid, I never really liked these movies, but I really liked two characters, and that was General Grievous and Darth Maul. Clearly I hadn't developed a brain yet, because if you ask me, Darth Maul is the worst character in the entire trilogy. Surely the only reason people like Darth Maul is because of the lightsaber duel and what he does in other Star Wars stories. But in this movie, he sucks ass. Keep in mind, I didn't watch Star Wars Rebels or whatever the fuck that show is called. I've only watched the movies. You want to know what lines Darth Maul has in the entire trilogy? 5. He's got 30 seconds of screen time while talking. Fucking Rose has more lines than him in The Rise of Skywalker. And honestly, I think Darth Maul had the potential to be a good villain if he was a consistent threat across all 3 films. Remember how I said this film feels completely disconnected to the main plot of the trilogy? Well, I think they could have fixed that if Darth Maul narrowly escaped Obi-Wan at the end of the movie. Not only would we get more screen time with him in later films, which would turn him to a greater threat and character, but it gives Obi-Wan an engaging goal that we would root for. Now, admittedly, I'd only root for Obi-Wan if Qui-Gon's death actually meant anything to me, but that's George's fault for making their chemistry and care for each other completely non-existent. Obi-Wan's main goal in the later movies is to train Anakin, but I think he would have been a lot more interesting if he also developed guilt by not killing Darth Maul. I think a rematch between those two in the second film would have been a lot better than some of the shit that happens in the second movie. I'm sorry to all the Darth Maul fans out there, I'm sure he's a lot cooler in other Star Wars media, but as it stands, I can confidently say that Darth Maul is the worst villain in the entire Star Wars franchise. Hopefully I've made my point as to why I don't like this film. This may seem harsh to you, but I'm giving this movie a 3 out of 10. To me, it's not even in the same league as Force Awakens or The Last Jedi. And yet, 71% of people think that this trilogy is better than one of the greatest trilogies ever put to screen. How is that even possible? It has to be because of nostalgia and cool fight scenes. And surely the next 2 films are incredible, right? Holy fuck, the dialogue is atrocious. I just want to clarify that this movie is still really bad, but to me it's a lot better than The Phantom Menace. At least it serves a purpose to the overall Star Wars saga, so I would maybe rewatch this film if I were ever to do another Star Wars marathon. So yeah, the dialogue is even worse in this movie compared to the previous one.
That must be frustrating.
It's worse. He's overly critical. He never listens. He doesn't understand. It's not fair.
And as you might have noticed from that clip, the acting is also a lot worse. Once again, there are some incredible actors here. Samuel L. Jackson, Natalie Portman, and yet the performances are still incredibly stale, especially with Anakin. I don't like saying this because he makes a huge improvement in the third film, and he seems like the most down-to-earth and chill guy on interviews. But he does make a lot of scenes hard to sit through, so I can't forgive him that much. What I will say though is that even though the acting is bad, Anakin as a character is the most interesting character so far in the trilogy, along with Obi-Wan. They form a relatively fun partnership together, and Obi-Wan in particular adds a whole lot more personality this time around. He was really boring in the first film, but he's a little more fun in this one and actually feels like a wise, strong Jedi. Just like Qui-Gon Jinn. I really enjoyed his storyline of following Jango Fett and finding out about the clones. I love how these Slenderman-looking aliens willingly give earth-shattering information to Obi-Wan like it's no big deal. And the whole time he has to pretend like the information he's receiving right now isn't extremely worrying. This is the first time so far in the trilogy where I'm genuinely intrigued how the story will unfold. However, the issue is, whilst all of this is happening, we keep cutting back to some really shitty romance.
Here everything is soft and smooth.
Anakin is madly in love with Padme, and the way he expresses his love is so bad. But admittedly, some scenes are a lot more bearable than the others, and it feels natural enough that they would get together. It doesn't feel rushed, unlike something else that happens in the next movie, so I don't mind the progression of these two. To be fair, I'd definitely rather these two forming a genuine connection to one another rather than simply telling the audience they're in love, which is exactly what happens between Anakin and Obi-Wan.
You fell into that nightmare, Master, and I rescued you, remember? Oh, yes.
Come the fuck on, man. I'm not convinced in the slightest that these two are great friends. I don't understand why they thought this was a good idea. It's like that scene in The Amazing Spider-Man where Harry and Peter spend an entire scene talking about how great friends they are, even though he was never mentioned at all in the first film. Anyways, let's now look at a scene where Anakin slaughters an entire village. I'm sorry, but this comes out of fucking nowhere. Okay, I get it. His mother was just killed, but nothing in the first two films would suggest that Anakin would murder an entire village. Except for Yoda directly telling the audience that his future is uncertain. His slow turn to the dark side would be a lot more effective if he transitioned a lot more naturally. This trilogy has such great ideas. The protagonist slowly turning into the main antagonist of the Star Wars franchise, corruption within the Republic, the Clone Wars, but a good idea isn't worth much with poor execution. This is so fucking annoying because I can see the potential. This trilogy could have been great, but you really have to dig to find it. I'm actually upset right now. I want to talk about something I like. And you know what? I had one thing to look forward to. The only thing that's consistently great across all of these films. The soundtrack is so good. Listen, I know I talk about soundtracks all the fucking time in my videos, but I have to. It puts me in such a good mood, and I remember films by listening to the soundtracks, and this trilogy is no exception. Anyways, I feel better now. Let's talk about the climax. The climax of this film is once again pretty epic, and it's actually a pretty common theme within this trilogy. All three films have an exciting final act. Now, I did say that the music is the best part with this entire trilogy, but now that I think about it, the action is pretty good across all three films as well. Come on, man, I'm trying to compliment you here. Okay, just ignore that scene. That's one of the worst action scenes I've ever seen from a high budget film. But in general, most action scenes are very high quality. Probably better than the other two trilogies in this franchise. Wait, am I starting to like these movies? No. These movies are bad. The dialogue is even worse, the story makes absolutely no sense, and the romance is bad. Oh my god, it's terrible. And whilst I do like the action, the tension isn't always very high because you have to genuinely care about the characters who are fighting. But at least they're visually pleasing to look at. And when an action scene involves Anakin and Obi-Wan, I am slightly on the edge of my seat since I'm finally starting to care about them more by this point. And honestly, this entire sequence between our favourite characters in the middle of a coliseum is actually fun to watch. After all, we're watching Star Wars. War is literally in the title, and yet this is the first time where it genuinely feels like it, and so I'm thoroughly enjoying myself. And on top of all the fun action, a lot of the scenes are fucking hilarious because of 3CPO. I usually don't give a shit about him, even in the movies that I like, so he's honestly best represented in this movie. Oh, and also, once the battle involves ships and stuff, I became even more invested, and look at the effects. This movie came out in 2002, and yet this shit looks better than most Marvel movies out there. And this time, the final fight has a much cooler villain than Darth Maul, Count Dooku. And also, listen to his lightsaber. I fucking love how evil and threatening it sounds, especially compared to the blue and green ones. I'm currently doing sound design at my university and I've noticed how important it is, and Star Wars does a really phenomenal job at it. Anyway, yeah, the action is kinda mid, Count Dooku gets away and then the movie ends. Overall, I think this movie is leagues better than The Phantom Menace, which for some reason seems to be an unpopular opinion. This film has infinitely more personality, some genuinely interesting storylines, and I'd argue that the climax is even better in this film than in the last one. And so for all those reasons, I'm giving this movie a 5 out of 10. An improvement, but still one of the worst Star Wars movies. Okay, so up until this point, I've mainly been shitting on these movies. They're directed horribly, the pacing is all over the place, the acting is bad, and there's a lot wrong with these movies. I have to be honest and say that episode 1 and 2 of the prequels is a lot worse than The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi. And by this point, I started to get a little bit of Star Wars feed in my For You page. And I kept going on polls and videos claiming that the prequel trilogy was even better than the original Star Wars trilogy. The original trilogy, one of the greatest trilogies ever created in cinema. Those movies changed the landscape of cinema with its next level special effects, sound effects, and editing skills. The only reason people would ever say this stuff is because Revenge of the Sith must be incredible. So I hesitantly started to watch this film, expecting it to be better than the previous two films, but it couldn't be that good, right? Holy shit, I love this movie. Every single thing has been improved upon. The acting has gotten a lot better, the effects are honestly amazing, the characters feel like real people, and I'm legitimately interested in the story. What the fuck happened? Trust me, I'm as surprised as you guys are. I finally understand you guys. The most important thing this movie got right is with its characters and dialogue.
I sense Count Dooku.
I sense a trap.
Next move?
Spring the trap.
Did they just have a fun moment together? This was such a bizarre moment to me. Up until this point, every interaction between characters involved exposition and useless dialogue. This was the first time in the entire trilogy where I felt like these guys were real people. See, now I can see that these two are friends. This is way more effective than simply telling the audience that they're friends. The movie maintains quite a serious tone whilst being easily the funniest film of the prequels because it's the only movie where the characters show off their personality. And it's not just that scene, throughout the entire movie most characters feel more lively, the chemistry between the actors have gotten a lot better, and the dialogue is actually fine. Another thing that feels completely different compared to the previous films is that the tension is extremely high. The Republic is under massive threat after finding out about Palpatine's true intentions, the consequences of Order 66, and the Jedi with the highest promise turns into the antagonist of the story. It seriously feels like the end of the galaxy. But best of all are the personal relationships between the characters. By this point, I've become invested in the characters because of the first two films. Anakin's relationship with Obi-Wan and his wife Padme, who also now has a kid, makes each action he takes have a lot more weight. Remember how I said the romance was really bad in the previous film? Yeah, well, that's all gone now. The chemistry between these two is now a lot better, and everything he does doesn't just have consequences on himself, but the people he loves as well. All of this results in me being genuinely glued to the screen, and even though so much happens in this film, I never felt overwhelmed. The pacing is actually really well done. Although this film does suffer because of the previous two films, the biggest example is Anakin's turn to the dark side. It is one of the main reasons why the prequels exist. We were supposed to be shown a slow and convincing portrayal of a man turning evil, but his eventual turn just simply didn't feel natural enough. Compare him to characters like Walter White, Syndrome, or Eren Yeager. All these characters turned into the main antagonist of the story at a natural pace and had experienced things that motivated them to turn evil. Something I feel the first two films simply just didn't execute very well. This isn't a criticism towards this film, but rather the whole trilogy, and it shows how prequels can make the sequels worse. Although one thing I definitely didn't like in this film is Anakin's intelligence, especially in the scene where he finally converts to the antagonist. So he finds out that Palpatine is a Sith Lord, and even though he attempted to manipulate Anakin to join him, it just didn't work at all. So he asks Mace Windu for help instead. Fair enough, makes sense so far. But then later on, Anakin spots Windu and Palpatine fighting for each other, and he's still got conflicted emotions about turning to the dark side because of the manipulation. And so whilst Mace Windu is about to kill Palpatine, he acts out of rage and is basically responsible for killing him. So he kills Mace Windu, feels really bad about it, but then literally 30 seconds later, Palpatine becomes his master.
I will do whatever you ask.
Anakin, what the fuck? How are you letting yourself be this manipulated? I thought you were smart. I really hate how inconsistent Anakin's intelligence is. It seriously feels like Anakin as a child is smarter than he is in the movie because he gets manipulated by Palpatine extremely easily. Not only does this scene insult his intelligence, but his character as well. It also makes Palpatine seem less threatening in my opinion. He doesn't feel like a master manipulator because of how easy it was to convert Anakin. And also, he was about to get his ass whooped by Mace. This should have been the most important scene in the entire trilogy, and for me it just kind of fell flat. However, what doesn't fall flat is a scene that has always stuck with me when I was a kid. The fight against Grievous. Every kid remembers this fight scene. Visually the coolest action scene in the entire trilogy, and is made so much cooler when they start chasing each other. Also, listen to this. That's a really cool sound effect. Good work, sound crew. And then during this battle, we get, in my opinion, the best scene in the movie.
The time has come. Execute Order 66.
Honestly, it's up there as one of my favorite scenes of any Star Wars movie, and the best part was, I didn't even know what Order 66 was. I had heard it plenty of times in my life, but I had completely forgotten, so watching this unfold was a genuine shock to me. It happens at such a crucial point of the story when everything has gone to shit. It honestly feels like the climax of the movie, except the real climax hasn't even happened yet, and oh my god, is the real one so good. I stand by my statement that Order 66 is the best scene of the film, but the most memorable one is the iconic fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan, capped off with a scene that's been stuck in my head ever since watching these movies.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
Ewan McGregor does such a phenomenal job acting in this film, and particularly this scene. He's finally been given the freedom to give his character life for the very first time, and he knocks it out of the park. Whenever I think about these movies, this is the scene that pops into my head. And to cap it off, this scene probably involves my favorite soundtrack in the entire franchise. Sure, Anakin's turn to the dark side felt a little rushed, but nonetheless, I was surprised to see myself feeling emotionally attached to these characters. And then Padme died because she was unwilling to live any longer despite giving birth to 2 children. You know what, I'm just gonna pretend like that didn't happen. But you know what? I'm happy to say that I really enjoyed this movie. A lot more than I expected. Now, I could give this movie around an 8 out of 10. But honestly, the fact that this movie exists, in my opinion, elevates the original trilogy. Especially that last film because it's so heavily focused on Darth Vader. And on top of that, I'd love to skip the first 2 films and rewatch this one. I could easily see this film finding itself in the category of very rewatchable films, along with Edge of Tomorrow and Pacific Rim. So because of that, I'm gonna give this movie a very high 8.5 out of 10. Wow, what a journey that was. Did I enjoy myself while watching these movies? Well, it was very mixed. 2 out of 3 of these movies are really bad, which simply isn't enough for me to justify. But weirdly, I like Star Wars a little bit more now. I won't start watching Star Wars Rebels or anything like that, but I can see why people love this franchise so much. One thing I picked up on that I think is worth mentioning is that not only is the last film a genuinely good movie, but the conclusion in each film is really good. Often when a story concludes in a very satisfying way, people are more forgiving towards the story. It's like when you have a bad day but it ends in a good night, and so you forget the bad shit that you went through. This is just a theory, of course, I could be completely wrong, but it's a theory that allows me to finally understand why people find these movies even better than the original trilogy. In terms of creating this video, I absolutely loved it, as I always do creating YouTube videos, and for those of you who made it this far, I appreciate you guys so much. Even though we have a small community of 500 subs, it's one that I cherish so much, and every comment I get just keeps me going. And who knows, maybe I'll review the other Star Wars trilogies in the future. This is the most effort I've put into a video since the Uncharted one, and I'm so glad I did because I really enjoyed putting this one together. But my semester at uni ends in a couple of weeks, so I'll have more time to create these types of videos. And also let me know your thoughts of these movies in the comments below. I would love to know, and I'll make sure to read every single one of your comments. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya!